The Western Philosophy, Chapter 10. Bergson, Croce, and Bertrand Russell. Section 3. Creative Evolution. With this new orientation, evolution appears to us as something different from the blind and the dreary mechanism of struggle and destruction which Darwin and Spencer described. We sense duration, evolution, the accumulation of vital powers, the inventiveness of life and mind, the continual elaboration of the absolutely new. We are prepared to understand why the most recent and expert investigators like Jennings and Malpass reject the mechanical theory of protozoan behavior and why Professor E. B. Wilson, Dean of Contemporary Cytologists, concludes his book on the cell with the statement that the study of the cell has, on the whole, seemed to widen rather than to narrow the enormous gap that separates even the lowest forms of life from the inorganic world. And everywhere in the world of biology, one hears of the rebellion against Darwin. Darwinism means, presumably, the origin of new organs and functions, new organisms and species by the natural selection of favorable variations. But this conception, hardly half century old, is already worm-eaten with difficulties. How, on the theory, did the instincts originate? It would be convenient to conceive them as the inherited accumulation of acquired habits. But expert opinion closes that door in our faces, though someday that door may be opened, if only congenital powers and qualities are transmissible. Every instinct must have been, on its first appearance, as strong as it natively is now. It must have been born, so to speak, adult, in full panoply for action, else it could not have favored its possessor in the struggle for existence. If on its first appearance it was weak, it could have achieved survival value only through that acquired strength which, by current hypothesis, is not inherited. Every origin is here a miracle. And as with the first instincts, so with every variation, one wonders how the change could have offered. In its first form, a handle to selection. In the case of such complex organs as the eye, the difficulty is discouraging. Either the eye appeared at once, full formed and competent, which is as credible as Jonah's introspection of whale, or it began with a series of fortuitous variations, which, by a still more fortuitous survival, produced the eye. At every step, the theory of a mechanical production of complicated structures by a blind process of variation and selection presents us with fairy tales that have all the incredibility of childhood's lore and a little of its beauty. The most decisive difficulty, however, is the appearance of similar effects brought about by different means in widely divergent lines of evolution. Take as example the invention of sex as a mode of reproduction, both in plants and in animals. Here are lines of evolution as divergent as could be, and yet the same complex accident occurs in both. Or take the organs of sight in two very distinct phyla, the mollusca and the vertebrates. How could the same small variations, incalculable in number, have ever occurred in the same order on two independent lines of evolution if they were purely accidental? More remarkable still, nature arrives at identical results in something in sometimes neighboring species by entirely different embryogenic processes. The retina of the vertebrate is produced by the expansion of the rudimentary brain of the embryo. In the mollusca, on the contrary, the retina is derived from the ectoderm directly. If the crystalline lens of a triton be removed, it is regenerated by the iris. Now, the original lens was built out of the ectoderm, while the iris is of mesodermal origin. What is more, in the Salamandra maculata, if the lens be removed and the iris left, the regeneration of the lens takes place at the upper part of the iris. But if this upper part of the iris itself be taken away, the regeneration takes place in the inner or retinal layer of the remaining region. Thus parts differently situated, differently constituted, meant normally for different functions, are capable of performing the same duties and even of manufacturing, when necessary, the same pieces of the machine. So, in a manger and a fudger, lost memories and functions reappear in regenerated or substituted tissues. Surely we have here overwhelming evidence that there is something more in evolution than a helpless mechanism of material parts. Life is more than its machinery. It is a power that can grow, that can restore itself, that can mold to its own will some measure of environing circumstance. Not that there is any external design determining these marvels. That would be merely an inverted mechanism of fatalism as destructive of human initiative and of creative evolution as the somber surrender of Hindu thought to India's heat. We must get beyond both points of view mechanism and finalism as being at bottom only standpoints to which the human mind has been led by considering the work of man. We thought at first that all things moved because of some crazy human will, using them as instruments in a cosmic game, and then we thought that the cosmos itself was a machine because we had been dominated in character and philosophy by our mechanical age. There is a design in things, but in them not outside, an entelechy, an inward determination of all the parts by the function and the purpose of the whole. Life is that which makes efforts, which pushes upwards and outwards and on always, and always the procreant urge of the world. It is the opposite of inertia and the opposite of accident. There is a direction in the growth to which it itself impelled. Against it is the undertow of matter, the lag and the slack of things towards relaxation and rest and death, and every stage life has had to fight with the inertia of its vehicle, and if it conquers death through reproduction, it does so only by yielding every citadel in turn and abandoning every individual body at last to inertia and decay. Even to stand is to defy matter and its laws, while to move about, to go forth and seek, and not plant-like. To wait is a victory purchased at every moment by effort and fatigue. And the consciousness slips as soon as it is permitted into the restful automatism of instinct, habit, and sleep. At the outset, life is almost as inner as matter. It takes a stationary form as if the vital impulse were too weak to risk the adventure of motion. And in one great avenue of development, this motionless stability has been the goal of life. The bending lily and the majestic oak are altars to the god security, but life was not content with this stay at home existence of the plant. Always its advances have been away from security towards freedom, away from carapaces, scales, and hides, and other burdensome protections to the ease and perilous liberty of the bird. So the heavy hoplite was supplanted by the legionary. The knight clad in armor had to give place to the light, free moving infantryman, and in a general way, in the evolution of life, just as in the evolution of human society and of individual destinies. The greatest successes have been for those who accepted the heaviest risks. So, too, man has ceased to evolve new organs on his body. He makes tools and weapons instead and lays them aside when they are not needed rather than carry all his armament at every step, like those gigantic fortresses. The mastodon and the megatherium, whose heavy security lost them the mastery of the globe. Life may be impeded as well as aided by its instruments. It is with instincts as with organs. They are the tools of the mind, and like all organs that are attached and permanent, they become burden when the environment that needed them has disappeared. Instinct comes ready made and gives decisive and usually successful responses to stereotyped and ancestral situations, but it does not adapt the organism to change. It does not enable man to meet flexibly the fluid complexities of modern life. It is the vehicle of security, while intellect is the organ of an adventurous liberty. It is life taking on the blind obedience of the machine. How significant it is that we laugh Usually, when a living thing behaves like matter, like mechanism, when the cloud tumbles about aimlessly and leans against pillars that are not there, or when our best beloved falls on an icy path and we are tempted to laugh first and ask questions afterward. That geometrical life, which Spinoza almost confused with deity, is really a reason for humor and tears. It is ridiculous and shameful that men should be machines, and ridiculous and shameful that their philosophy should describe them so. Life has taken three lines in its evolution. In one, it relapsed into the almost material torpor of plants, and found there occasionally a supine security and the cowardly tenure of 1,000 years. In another avenue, its spirit and effort congealed into instinct as it the ants and the bees. But in the vertebrates, it took the dare of freedom, cast off its ready-made instincts, and marched bravely into the endless risks of thought. Instinct still remains the profounder mode of visioning reality and catching the essence of the world. But intelligence grows ever stronger and bolder and wider in its scope. It is at last in intelligence that life has placed its interests and its hopes. This persistently creative life, of which every individual and every species is an experiment, is what we mean by God. God and life are one, but this God is finite, not omnipotent, limited by matter, and overcoming its inertia painfully, step by step, and not omniscient, but groping gradually towards knowledge and consciousness and more light. God, thus defined, has nothing of the ready-made. He is unceasing life, action, freedom, creation. So conceived is not a mystery. We experience it in ourselves when we act freely, when we consciously choose our actions and plot our lives, our struggles and our sufferings, our ambitions and our defeats, our yearnings to be better and stronger than we are the voice and current of the elan vital in us. That vital urge which makes us grow and transforms this wandering planet into a theater of unending creation. And who knows but that at last life may win the greatest victory of all over its ancient enemy, matter, and learn even to elude mortality. Yet, let us have an open mind even to our hopes. All things are possible to life if time is generous. Consider what life and mind have done in the mere moment of millennium with the forests of European America, and then see how foolish it is to put up barriers to life's achievements. The animal takes its stand on the plant. Man bestrides animality and the whole of humanity in space and time is one immense army galloping beside and before and behind each of us in an overwhelming charge, able to beat down every resistance and clear the most formidable obstacles, perhaps even death. The fourth section, criticism. I believe, says Bergson, that the time given to refutation in philosophy is usually time lost. Of the many attacks directed by the many thinkers against each other, what now remains? Nothing, or assuredly very little. That which counts and endures is the modicum of positive truth which each contributes. The true statement is of itself able to displace the erroneous idea, and becomes, without our having taken the trouble of refuting anyone, the best of reputations. This is the voice of wisdom herself. When we prove or disapprove a philosophy, we are merely offering another one, which, like the first, is a fallible compound of experience and hope, as experience widens and hope changes. We find more truth in the falsehoods we denounced, and perhaps more falsehood in our youth's eternal truths. When we are lifted upon the wings of rebellion, we like determinism and mechanism. They are so cynical and devilish. But when death looms up suddenly at the foot of the hill, we try to see beyond it into another hope. Philosophy is a function of age, nevertheless. What strikes one first in reading Bergson is the style, brilliant, not with paradox fireworks of Nietzsche, but with a steady brightness as of a man who is resolved to live up to the fine traditions of luminous French prose. It is harder to be wrong in French than in some other languages, for the French will not tolerate obscurity, and the truth is clearer than fiction. If Bergson is occasionally obscured, it is by the squandered wealth of his imagery, his analogies, and his illumination, illustrations. He has an almost Semitic passion for metaphor and is apt at times to substitute ingenious simile for patient proof. We have to be on our guard against this image maker, as one bewares of a jeweler or a real estate poet, while recognizing gratefully in creative evolution our century first philosophic masterpiece. Perhaps Bergson would have been wiser to base his criticism of the intellect on the grounds of a broader intelligence rather than on the crisis of intuition. Introspective intuition is as fallible as external sense. Each must be tested and corrected by matter of fact, experience, and each can be trusted only so far as its findings illuminate and advance our action. Bergson presumes too much in supposing that the intellect catches only the states and not the flux of reality and life. Thought is a stream of transitive ideas, as James has shown before Bergson wrote. Ideas are merely points that memory selects in the flow of thought, and the mental current adequately reflects the continuity of perception and the movement of life. It was a wholesome thing that this eloquent challenge should check the excesses of intellectualism, but it was as unwise to offer intuition in the place of thought as it would be to correct the fancies of youth with the fairy tales of childhood. Let us correct our errors forward, not backward, to say that the world suffers from too much intellect would require the courage of a madman. The romantic protest against thinking from Rousseau and Chateaubriand to Bergson and Nietzsche and James has done its work. We will agree to dethrone the goddess of reason if we are not asked to relight the candles before the icon of intuition. Man exists by instinct, but he progresses by intelligence. That which is best in Bergson is his attack upon the materialist mechanism. Our pundits of the laboratory had become a little too confident of their categories and thought to squeeze all the cosmos into a test tube. Materialism is like a grammar that recognizes only nouns, but reality, like language, contains action. as well as objects, verbs as well as substantives, life and motion as well as matter. One could understand, perhaps, a merely molecular memory like the fatigue of overburdened steel, but molecular foresight, molecular planning, molecular idealism. Had Bergson met these new dogmas with a cleansing skepticism, he might have been a little less constructive, but he would have left himself less open to reply. His doubts melt away when his system begins to form. He never stops to ask what matter is, whether it may not be somewhat less inert than we have thought, whether it may be not life's enemy but life's willing manual, if life but knew its mind. He thinks of the world and the spirit, of body and soul, of matter and life, as hostile to each other, but matter and body and the world are merely the materials that wait to be formed by intelligence and will. And who knows that these things, too, are not forms of life and auguries of mind? Perhaps here, too, as Heraclitus would say, there are gods. Bergson's critique of Darwinism issues naturally from his vitalism. He carries on the French tradition established by Lamarck and sees impulse and desire as active forces in evolution. His spirited temper rejects the Spencerian conception of an evolution engineered entirely by the mechanical integration of matter and dissipation of motion. Life is a positive power, an effort that built its organs through the very persistence of its desires. We must admire the thoroughness of Bergson's biological preparation, his familiarity with the literature, even with the periodicals in which current science hides itself for a decade of probation. He offers his erudition modestly, never with the elephantine dignity that weighs down the pages of Spencer, or in all his criticism of Darwin has proved effective. The specifically Darwinian features of the evolution theory are now generally abandoned. In many ways, the relation of Bergson to the age of Darwin is a replica of Kant's relation to Voltaire. Kant strove to repulse that great wave of secular and partly atheistic Intellectualism, which had begun with Bacon and Descartes and had ended in the skepticism of Diderot and Hume, and his efforts took the line of denying the finality of intellect in the field of transcendental problems. But Darwin unconsciously and Spencer consciously renewed the assault which Voltaire and his more than Voltairean followers had levelled at the ancient faith and mechanist materialism which had given ground before Kant and Schopenhauer and won all of its old power at the beginning of our century. Bergson attacked it not with a Kantian critique of knowledge, nor with the idealist contention that matter is known only through mind, but by following the lead of Schopenhauer and seeking in the objective as well as in the subjective world an energizing principle, an active entelechy, which might make more intelligible the miracles and the subtleties of life. Never was vitalism so forcefully argued or so attractively dressed. Bergson soared to an early popularity because he had come to the defense of hopes which sprang eternally in the human breast. When people found that they could believe in immortality and deity without losing the respect of philosophy, they were pleased and grateful, and Bergson's lecture room became the salon of splendid ladies, happy to have their hearts' desires upheld with such learned eloquence. Strangely mingled with them were the ardent syndicalists who found in Bergson's critique of intellectualism a justification of their gospel of less thought and more action. But this sudden popularity exacted its price. The contradictory nature of Bergson's support disintegrated his following, and Bergson may share the fate of Spencer, who lived to be present at the burial of his own reputation. Yet, of all contemporary contributions to philosophy, Bergson's is the most precious. We needed his emphasis on the elusive contingency of things and the resounding activity of mind. We were near to thinking of the world as a finished and predetermined show in which our initiative was a self delusion and our efforts a devilish humor of the gods. After Bergson, we come to see the world as the stage and the material of our own originative powers. Before him, we were cocks and wheels in a vast and dead machine. Now, if we wish it, we can help to write our own parts in the drama of creation. Today's work is over.